The smell of barbecue smoke and the sound of children's laughter filled the Rodriguez family's backyard on that sweltering 4th of July afternoon in Brownsville, Texas. Maria Rodriguez wiped sweat from her forehead as she watched her 3-year-old daughter Emma bounce happily in the inflatable castle they'd rented for the occasion. 23 family members had gathered for their annual celebration, and Emma was the star of the show in her bright pink princess dress, complete with sparkly tiara that caught the sunlight every time she moved. "Myra, Emma," called out her cousin Sophia, pointing to the bounce house. "Come play with us." Emma's infectious giggle echoed across the yard as she toddled toward the colorful inflatable structure, her tiny hands clapping with delight. Maria smiled, momentarily distracted by her sister Carmen, who was asking about the potato salad recipe. The afternoon felt perfect, exactly the kind of memory they'd all treasure for years to come. Carlos Rodriguez manned the grill with military precision, flipping burgers and rotating corn on the cob, while his brothers debated the merits of different hot sauce brands. As a construction foreman, Carlos was used to managing chaos, but family gatherings presented their own unique challenges. His mother-in-law kept insisting the meat wasn't cooked enough, while his teenage nephew Miguel kept trying to sneak beer from the cooler. Still, seeing Emma's joy made every moment of stress worthwhile. The heat was becoming unbearable, even in the shade. Maria's ice-filled coolers were emptying faster than anticipated, and the drinks were turning lukewarm in the 98-degree temperature. She glanced at Emma, who was now playing a game of tag with her cousins near the bounce house, her cheeks flushed pink from excitement and heat. "I'll be right back, Mia," Maria called to her daughter, though Emma was too engrossed in her game to acknowledge her mother's words. Maria jogged toward the house, her flip-flops slapping against the concrete patio. The kitchen felt like a blessed sanctuary, with its air conditioning running at full blast. She grabbed 2 bags of ice from the freezer and paused to splash cold water on her face at the sink. Through the window, she could see the party continuing in full swing. Uncle Roberto had started up his accordion, and several family members were already beginning to dance despite the oppressive heat. The entire trip to the kitchen took exactly 2 minutes and 37 seconds. She would later replay this time frame in her mind thousands of times, wondering how everything could change so completely in such a brief moment. As she pushed through the sliding glass door with the ice bags in her arms, Maria's eyes immediately swept to the bounce house where she'd last seen Emma. Sophia and the other children were still playing, but Emma was nowhere to be seen. "Emma?" Maria called out, her voice carrying easily across the yard. "Emma, where are you, baby?" A slight flutter of concern began in her chest, but she pushed it down. Emma was probably just playing hide-and-seek or had wandered over to see the adults. 3-year-olds were notorious for their ability to disappear and reappear when least expected. "Has anyone seen Emma?" Maria asked the group of women sitting under the umbrella table. Her sister Carmen looked up from feeding her own toddler. "I thought she was playing in the bounce house with Sophia," Carmen replied, now craning her neck to look around the yard. "Sophia," she called to her daughter, "where's Emma?" 10-year-old Sophia bounced over, her face scrunched in confusion. "She was playing with us, Tia Maria, but then she said she saw something pretty by the fence and walked away. I thought she was going to you." The flutter of concern in Maria's chest suddenly transformed into a cold knot of fear. Emma was adventurous for her age, but she never wandered far from the family group, especially at large gatherings where she might feel overwhelmed. "Carlos." Maria's voice cut through the sounds of conversation and music with an urgency that made everyone stop what they were doing. "Carlos, I can't find Emma." The panic in her voice was unmistakable, and within seconds, the entire party had transformed from a celebration into a search mission. Uncle Miguel immediately began checking under tables and behind the storage shed, while Carlos's brothers spread out to cover different sections of the 2-acre property. "She has to be here somewhere," Carlos said, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying growing alarm. "Emma," he called, his deep voice booming across the yard. "Emma, come to Daddy. It's time for ice cream." They all waited, straining their ears for the sound of little feet running, or Emma's distinctive giggle. Instead, they were met with a silence that felt increasingly ominous. Maria's sister-in-law, Rosa, was checking inside the house when she made a discovery that sent ice through everyone's veins. "The back gate," she called out, her voice shaky. "The back gate is wide open." Everyone knew that gate had been securely latched when the party began. Carlos had checked it himself, knowing how curious Emma could be about exploring beyond their yard. Uncle Miguel, a police officer in the neighboring town, immediately took charge. "Nobody touch the gate," he ordered, pulling out his cell phone. "We need to call this in right now." "Maria, when did you last see her exactly?" As Maria recounted her trip to the kitchen, Miguel was already dialing 911, his training overriding the family panic that threatened to consume them all. The next few minutes passed in a blur of frantic activity. Family members spread out beyond their property line, calling Emma's name and checking with neighbors. Mrs. Henderson from next door confirmed she hadn't seen anything unusual, but Mr. Vasquez across the street mentioned hearing a car door slam about 10 minutes earlier, though he hadn't looked outside to see what kind of vehicle it was. By the time the first police cruiser arrived, sirens wailing in the distance like a funeral dirge, Maria Rodriguez was sitting on her porch steps, sobbing into her hands, while Carlos paced back and forth, his cell phone pressed to his ear as he called every family member who hadn't attended the barbecue. The party decorations still fluttered in the evening breeze, and the bounce house continued its cheerful bobbing motion, a surreal reminder of how quickly joy could transform into every parent's worst nightmare. As Detective Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her unmarked vehicle and approached the distraught family, she carried with her the grim knowledge that in child abduction cases, the first few hours are absolutely critical. The clock was already ticking, and somewhere out there, a little girl in a pink princess dress was counting on them to bring her home. Detective Sarah Mitchell had worked child abduction cases for 12 years, and she recognized the look in Maria Rodriguez's eyes. Immediately, the desperate hope mixed with growing terror that every parent experiences when their child vanishes. As she approached the Rodriguez family's backyard, now illuminated by the harsh glare of police floodlights that transformed the festive scene into something resembling a crime scene, Sarah knew she was racing against time in the most literal sense possible. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Detective Mitchell," she said, kneeling down to Maria's eye level on the porch steps. "I know this is terrifying, but I need you to focus and help me understand exactly what happened. Every detail matters right now." Maria nodded through her tears, clutching a small pink sock she'd found in Emma's bedroom, something that still carried her daughter's scent, though she couldn't articulate why holding it made her feel slightly less like she was drowning. The backyard had been transformed into a command center with military efficiency. Officer Miguel Rodriguez, Emma's uncle, had secured the scene and was coordinating with arriving units. Volunteer firefighters from 3 surrounding counties began arriving within the hour, their vehicles creating a convoy of flashing lights that could be seen for miles. Neighbors emerged from their homes despite the late hour, forming search parties without being asked. The Hispanic community in Brownsville was tight-knit, and when one of their children was in danger, everyone responded as if it were their own family. Carlos hadn't spoken a coherent sentence since Detective Mitchell arrived. Instead, he walked the perimeter of his property over and over, his work boots wearing a path in the grass as he traced the same route from the back gate, along the fence line, around the storage shed, and back to the porch. His construction crew had arrived unbidden, bringing industrial flashlights and portable generators. These hardened men, who spent their days building homes for other families, now worked silently in the darkness, searching for one little girl, who had somehow vanished from what should have been the safest place in her world. The statistics aren't good, Detective Mitchell confided to Sergeant Williams as they reviewed the initial witness statements. After the first 24 hours, child abduction cases become exponentially more dangerous. We've got maybe 18 hours left in what we call the golden window. She'd seen too many cases where hope gradually transformed into recovery missions, and the thought of having to deliver that news to Maria Rodriguez made her stomach clench with familiar dread. By 2 a.m., the search had expanded beyond the Rodriguez property into the surrounding neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson from next door had provided a crucial piece of information. She remembered seeing an unfamiliar white van parked on their usually quiet street around the time Emma disappeared. The van had been there for maybe 10 minutes, she recalled, and she'd noticed it specifically because the driver appeared to be watching the Rodriguez house. When pressed for more details, she admitted she hadn't gotten a clear look at the license plate, but she was certain it was a commercial-style van with tinted windows. The K-9 units were scheduled to arrive at first light, but every hour of delay felt like a small death to Emma's family. Maria's mother had driven up from Matamoros, Mexico, and was now leading a group of neighborhood women in preparing food for the searchers. It was a peculiarly beautiful sight. These women, many of whom had never met before, working together in the Rodriguez kitchen as if they'd been cooking together for years. Their quiet efficiency provided a stark contrast to the controlled chaos happening outside. Carlos's silence was becoming increasingly worrying to his family members. His brother Roberto tried multiple times to engage him in conversation, but Carlos seemed to exist in his own private hell, replaying every moment of the afternoon and searching for clues he might have missed. "I should have been watching her," he finally whispered to Roberto as they stood by the back gate at 3 a.m. "Maria went inside for ice, but I was right here. I was cooking, talking to everyone, and I never even looked her way. What kind of father does that make me?" The media arrived with the dawn, transforming the quiet residential street into a circus of news vans and reporters. Detective Mitchell had expected this. Missing children, especially photogenic little girls like Emma, attracted media attention like magnets. She'd learned to work with journalists rather than fight them, knowing that the right news coverage could generate tips that solved cases. Emma's kindergarten photo, the one where she was missing her 2 front teeth, but grinning with pure joy, would soon be plastered across every television screen and social media feed in South Texas. As the sun rose on July 5th, bringing with it another day of oppressive heat that would climb toward 100 degrees, the scope of the search expanded dramatically. The Texas Rangers had been called in, along with FBI agents who specialized in child abduction cases. Aircraft from the Border Patrol began systematic aerial searches of the vast, empty stretches of land surrounding Brownsville. The Rio Grande Valley, with its maze of irrigation canals, abandoned buildings, and dense brush country, provided countless places where someone could hide a small child, or worse. Maria hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and had barely moved from the porch except to use the bathroom. Neighbors brought her coffee and blankets, but she seemed to exist in a state of suspended animation, as if moving too much or thinking too hard might somehow make Emma's disappearance more permanent. Her sister Carmen finally convinced her to change clothes and wash her face, arguing that Emma would want to see her mother looking strong when she came home. The word "win" hung in the air like a prayer that everyone desperately wanted to believe. The first potential break in the case came at 7:30 a.m. when a convenience store clerk called the tip line. He'd been watching the news coverage and remembered selling cigarettes to a nervous-acting man in a white van around 4 p.m. the previous day. The man had asked for directions to the interstate, which struck the clerk as odd, since the highway entrance was clearly visible from the store parking lot. More importantly, the clerk remembered hearing what sounded like a child crying from inside the van, though the man had quickly claimed it was his radio. Detective Mitchell felt her pulse quicken as she reviewed the tip. It wasn't much, but it was the first concrete lead they'd received. She immediately dispatched units to the convenience store to review security footage and interview the clerk more thoroughly. For the first time since Emma's disappearance, she allowed herself a small flicker of hope. In missing children cases, hope was a dangerous emotion, but it was also the fuel that kept investigators working when logic suggested the odds were becoming insurmountable. As search teams prepared for another grueling day under the merciless Texas sun, one thing remained constant. Emma Rodriguez was still out there somewhere, and time was running out. Officer Jake Thompson had been working with German Shepherds for 15 years, but Rex was special, even among the elite canine units of South Texas. The 5-year-old dog had an uncanny ability to follow scent trails that other dogs couldn't detect, and his record spoke for itself. 12 missing children found alive, countless suspects apprehended, and a reputation that extended far beyond the Brownsville Police Department. As Jake loaded Rex into their specially equipped patrol vehicle at 5:47 a.m. on July 5th, he carried with him both hope and the heavy knowledge that Emma Rodriguez had been missing for nearly 14 hours. The Rodriguez property looked like a disaster zone when they arrived. Emergency vehicles lined the street for 3 blocks in either direction, their red and blue lights creating an otherworldly atmosphere in the pre-dawn darkness. Jake had worked enough missing child cases to recognize the organized chaos, search teams preparing equipment, command posts being established, and that particular energy that came when an entire community refused to accept the possibility that one of their children might not come home. Rex immediately sensed the urgency as Jake clipped on his working harness. The dog's ears perked up, and his entire body went into alert mode. This wasn't a training exercise or routine patrol. Jake had trained Rex to understand the difference between work and play, and the shepherd's focused intensity now was a beautiful thing to witness. "Okay, boy," Jake whispered, running his hand along Rex's muscular neck. "We've got a little girl out there counting on us. Show me what you can do." Detective Mitchell approached them with a small pink t-shirt that Emma had worn the day before. "This is the freshest scent we have," she explained, holding the garment out for Rex to smell. "Her mother says Emma wore this yesterday morning before changing into her princess dress for the party." Rex buried his nose in the fabric, taking several deep, analytical breaths. Jake watched his partner's nostrils flare as he processed the complex array of scents: laundry detergent, fabric softener, and beneath it all, the unique human scent that belonged to one 3-year-old girl. Within 30 seconds, Rex had Emma's scent locked in his memory. Jake gave him the command to search, and the transformation was immediate. Rex's nose dropped to the ground, and he began working in systematic sweeps across the backyard, his tail wagging slightly as he picked up the scent trail. Jake followed behind, reading his partner's body language like a book written in a language only they shared. Rex's confident gait told him they had a strong trail to follow. The scent led Rex directly to the swing set where Emma had been playing the afternoon before. He circled the area twice, confirming the strength of the trail, then headed toward the bounce house with purposeful strides. Jake could see Maria Rodriguez watching from the porch, her hands pressed to her mouth as if she were afraid to breathe. Hope and terror warred in her eyes as she watched this dog, this 4-legged miracle worker, follow her daughter's invisible footsteps through their yard. Rex paused at the bounce house, his head tilting as he processed competing scents. Multiple children had played there, their scents overlapping and creating a complex olfactory puzzle. But Rex was trained for exactly this situation. He took several more deep breaths, sorted through the various human smells, and locked back onto Emma's unique scent signature. His tail began wagging more vigorously. The trail was getting stronger, not weaker. The German Shepherd led them toward the back of the property with increasing confidence. Carlos Rodriguez fell into step behind Jake, his face a mask of barely controlled emotion. "Is he finding something?" Carlos asked, his voice hoarse from calling Emma's name throughout the night. Jake nodded, but didn't take his eyes off Rex. "He's got her scent, and it's strong. We're on the right track." At the back gate, Rex's behavior changed dramatically. His ears stood straight up, and he began moving with the focused intensity that Jake recognized as his hot trail mode. The dog sniffed around the gate posts, confirming what everyone already suspected. Emma had definitely passed through this opening. Rex pushed through the gate and immediately turned left, following a path that led away from the residential neighborhood and toward the undeveloped land beyond. The terrain became more challenging as they moved away from the manicured lawns of the subdivision. Thick brush, scattered oak trees, and irrigation ditches created a maze of potential hiding spots. Rex navigated it all with the confidence of a bloodhound, his nose never leaving the ground for more than a few seconds at a time. Behind them, other search teams spread out in formation, but Jake kept his focus on Rex. His partner had never let him down before. After nearly a mile of tracking through increasingly wild terrain, Rex suddenly stopped at a chain-link fence that marked the boundary of an abandoned industrial property. The area had once housed a small manufacturing plant, but it had been closed for years and was now slowly being reclaimed by the relentless South Texas vegetation. Rex began whimpering and pawing at the base of the fence, his agitation clearly visible. "What is it, boy?" Jake knelt beside his partner, following Rex's gaze to a particular section of the fence. There, caught on a sharp protrusion of wire, about 3 feet off the ground, was a small piece of bright pink fabric. Jake's heart rate spiked as he carefully extracted the material without contaminating any potential evidence. The fabric was definitely from the child's dress, and the height at which it was caught suggested someone small, very small, had passed through or been carried through this fence. Detective Mitchell arrived within minutes of Jake's radio call, bringing with her evidence collection team and Maria Rodriguez, who immediately identified the fabric as coming from Emma's princess dress. "That's her dress," Maria sobbed, clutching Carlos's arm. "That's definitely from her dress. She was wearing it when ... She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Everyone understood the implications. The fabric told a story that chilled everyone present. Emma had definitely been here, but the question remained. Had she come willingly, following something that caught her attention, or had she been brought here against her will? The height of the fabric suggested she might have been carried, which painted an increasingly dark picture of what had happened to the little girl. Rex was beside himself with excitement now, pulling against his leash and whimpering as he tried to continue following the scent trail beyond the fence. Jake could see that the trail continued, leading deeper into the abandoned industrial complex. "We need to get through that fence," he told Detective Mitchell. "Rex is telling me the trail continues, and it's still fresh enough for him to follow." As bolt cutters were brought up to create an opening in the fence, Jake looked down at Rex, whose brown eyes seemed to reflect the same determination that everyone felt. They were getting closer to Emma Rodriguez. Jake was certain of it. Rex had never been wrong before, and his confidence in following this particular trail was absolute. The question that haunted everyone was whether they would find her in time and in what condition. But for now, they had hope, and they had Rex leading the way into the unknown darkness ahead. The abandoned industrial complex beyond the fence felt like stepping into a post-apocalyptic nightmare. Rusted machinery stood like metal skeletons among weeds that had grown taller than a person, and broken windows reflected the morning sun. Like dead eyes. Rex pulled Jake forward with renewed urgency, his nose locked onto a scent trail that seemed to grow stronger with every step. Detective Mitchell followed closely, her weapon drawn and her radio crackling with updates from other search teams spreading throughout the area. Rex led them through a maze of abandoned buildings, past a loading dock where homeless individuals had clearly been camping, and toward a cluster of maintenance sheds that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. But as they rounded the corner of the largest building, Rex suddenly stopped and began barking frantically at something that made Jake's blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks in the sandy soil, and not just any tire tracks. These were from a commercial van, recently made, and they led directly to a service road that connected to Highway 77. "Mitchell, you need to see this," Jake called out, photographing the tire impressions with his phone, while Rex continued his agitated barking. The tracks told a story that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Someone had definitely brought a vehicle to this isolated location. Someone who knew about the service road and understood how to access the abandoned property without being seen from the main roads. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was planned. Detective Mitchell was already on her radio, calling for a forensics team to cast the tire impressions, when Rex made another discovery that sent shockwaves through the search operation. Near the tire tracks, partially hidden under a piece of corrugated metal, Rex found Emma's sparkly tiara, the one she'd been wearing so proudly at the family barbecue. The plastic crown was cracked, and one of its fake jewels was missing, suggesting it had been torn from her head rather than dropped voluntarily. "We need to expand this search immediately," Mitchell ordered, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "This isn't a lost child anymore. This is definitely an abduction, and whoever took her has a significant head start." She was already formulating a plan that would involve roadblocks, Amber Alerts, and coordinating with law enforcement agencies across multiple states. The Rio Grande Valley's proximity to Mexico meant that Emma could be hundreds of miles away by now if they were dealing with human traffickers. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Gonzalez, a cashier at the Valero station on Highway 77, had been watching the morning news coverage during her overnight shift when she recognized something that made her hands shake as she reached for the phone. The white van that everyone was looking for. She'd seen it the previous evening. And more importantly, she'd seen the man driving it. She'd sold him cigarettes and energy drinks around 5:30 p.m., about 2 hours after Emma disappeared, and something about his nervous behavior had stuck with her memory. He kept looking over his shoulder, Maria told Detective Mitchell over the phone, her voice trembling with the realization that she might have encountered Emma's kidnapper. And he paid with exact change, like he didn't want to wait for me to make change. But the thing that really bothered me was that I heard crying coming from his van, like a little kid crying, and when I asked if everything was okay, he got really defensive and said it was just his radio. Detective Mitchell felt her pulse quicken as she took down every detail. "Maria, I need you to think carefully. Did you get a look at his license plate?" There was a pause that felt like an eternity before Maria responded. "I didn't see the whole plate, but I remember it started with the letters RH, because my ex-boyfriend's initials were Robert Harrison, and I thought it was weird to see those letters." The partial license plate information was exactly what they needed. Within 30 minutes, the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles had cross-referenced white commercial vans registered with plates beginning RH and come up with a list of 17 possible matches. But when they ran background checks on the registered owners, one name jumped out like a neon sign in the darkness. Robert Hayes, age 45, with a criminal history that made Detective Mitchell's stomach turn. Hayes had been released from Huntsville State Prison just 3 months earlier after serving 8 years for attempted kidnapping of a minor. His parole officer hadn't heard from him in 6 weeks, and his last known address was a motel in McAllen. But the manager confirmed he'd left without paying his bill. Most chilling of all, Hayes fit the exact physical description that Maria Gonzalez had provided: average height, thin build, greasy dark hair, and the kind of nervous energy that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. "This is our guy," Detective Mitchell told the assembled task force as Hayes's mugshot appeared on the mobile command center screens. Robert Hayes, convicted child predator, drives a white commercial van registered RH4729, and he's been off the radar for over a month. We need to find this van, and we need to find it now. The manhunt that followed was like nothing Brownsville had ever seen. Every law enforcement agency in South Texas mobilized with military precision. Helicopter units from the Border Patrol began systematic sweeps of highways and rural roads. Police departments from Corpus Christi to Laredo put out BOLOs, beyond the lookout alerts. The Texas Rangers activated their specialized fugitive task force. Even Mexico's federal police were notified in case Hayes attempted to cross the border. The break came at 11:47 a.m. when a sharp-eyed Texas Highway Patrol trooper spotted Hayes's van parked behind a truck stop near Harlingen, about 40 miles north of Brownsville. The van appeared empty, but steam was still rising from the engine, indicating it had been driven recently. Trooper Williams approached cautiously, his weapon drawn, and peered through the tinted windows to see a sight that confirmed their worst fears. Children's clothing scattered across the floor, rolls of duct tape, and a child's pink sock that looked exactly like the one Maria Rodriguez had been clutching. Hayes himself was found inside the truck stop restaurant, calmly eating a hamburger and watching the news coverage of Emma's disappearance on the mounted television. When he saw his own photograph appear on the screen as a person of interest, he didn't run or panic. Instead, he simply smiled a cold, calculating smile that chilled the arresting officers to their bones. It was the smile of someone who believed he held all the cards, someone who thought he was smarter than everyone hunting him. "Robert Hayes, you're under arrest for the kidnapping of Emma Rodriguez," Detective Mitchell announced as she snapped handcuffs around his wrists 20 minutes later. Hayes looked up at her with dead eyes that held no remorse, no fear, and no humanity. "You'll never find her," he said quietly, his voice carrying a tone of casual certainty that made Mitchell's blood freeze. "She's somewhere special now. Somewhere. Only I know about, and I'm not telling you anything." As Hayes was loaded into the back of a patrol car, still wearing that terrifying smile, Detective Mitchell realized they'd caught their suspect, but their work was far from over. Emma Rodriguez was still missing, still in danger, and now their only hope of finding her alive rested with convincing a sociopathic child predator to reveal where he'd hidden a 3-year-old girl. Time was running out, and Hayes seemed to be enjoying every second of their desperation. The interrogation room at the Brownsville Police Department felt like a pressure cooker as Detective Mitchell sat across from Robert Hayes, watching him chain-smoke cigarettes with the casual demeanor of someone discussing the weather rather than a missing child's life. Hayes had been in custody for 2 hours, and in that time, he'd requested a lawyer, a sandwich, and more cigarettes, but he hadn't said a single word about Emma Rodriguez's whereabouts. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder with each passing minute. It was now approaching 2 p.m. on July 5th, meaning Emma had been missing for nearly 22 hours. "Robert, we know you took Emma," Detective Mitchell began, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her chest. "We have witnesses, physical evidence, and your van is a rolling crime scene. The only question now is whether you help us find her alive, or whether you're going to be responsible for the death of a 3-year-old girl." Hayes took a long drag from his cigarette and blew the smoke toward the ceiling, his eyes never leaving Mitchell's face. The smile that had chilled everyone at his arrest never wavered. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos had driven down from San Antonio specifically for this interrogation. She'd spent 15 years specializing in crimes against children and had developed techniques for breaking even the most hardened predators. But Hayes was different. He seemed to feed off their desperation, growing more confident with each question they asked. "We can make this easier for you, Robert," Santos offered, sliding a legal pad across the table. "Just write down where she is, and we can talk about a plea deal that keeps you off death row." Hayes laughed, actually laughed, a sound so devoid of human warmth that it made both investigators' skin crawl. "You think I'm stupid?" he asked, finally speaking directly to them for the first time. "You think I don't know that the moment I tell you where she is, I lose all my leverage? Emma is my insurance policy, and I'm not cashing it in for some prosecutor's empty promises." He stubbled out his cigarette with deliberate slowness, as if he had all the time in the world. Outside the interrogation room, Carlos Rodriguez paced the hallway like a caged animal, his construction worker's hands clenched into fists that shook with barely contained violence. "Let me talk to him," he pleaded with Detective Mitchell during a break in questioning. "Let me in there for 5 minutes, and I guarantee he'll tell us where Emma is." Mitchell understood Carlos's rage, but she also knew that any confession obtained through coercion would be thrown out of court, potentially allowing Hayes to walk free. The forensics team had been working Hayes's van with scientific precision, cataloging every fiber, fingerprint, and DNA sample they could find. Evidence painted a horrifying picture of premeditation. Hayes had equipped his vehicle specifically for kidnapping children. Soundproofing material lined the cargo area, restraints had been installed, and child-sized clothing in various sizes suggested Emma wasn't his first victim. Most chilling was a handwritten notebook they found under the driver's seat, filled with detailed observations about local playgrounds, school schedules, and family routines. "He's been watching our children for months," Detective Mitchell told the assembled task force at 3 p.m. "This wasn't a crime of opportunity. Hayes has been planning this for a long time, and Emma was specifically targeted." The notebook contained detailed notes about the Rodriguez family's daily routines, including the fact that they hosted an annual 4th of July barbecue. Hayes had been studying them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, a forensic psychologist brought in to assist with the interrogation, reviewed Hayes's prison records and previous psychological evaluations. Her assessment was grim. Hayes exhibited classic signs of antisocial personality disorder with sadistic tendencies. "He's not going to break under normal interrogation techniques," she warned. "In fact, he's probably enjoying the attention and the sense of power he has over Emma's family. We need to change our approach completely." Meanwhile, search teams continued combing through Hayes's known associates and previous addresses, hoping to find clues about where he might have taken Emma. His ex-wife, who divorced him while he was in prison, provided a crucial lead. Hayes had always been obsessed with remote cabins and hunting lodges, places where he could be alone with his thoughts. She remembered him talking about an abandoned hunting camp in the mountains north of McAllen, a place his father had taken him as a child before social services removed him from the home. The breakthrough came at 4:17 p.m. when Hayes finally made a mistake. During a bathroom break, he'd asked the escorting officer about the weather forecast, specifically whether rain was expected in the hill country over the next few days. It was a seemingly innocent question, but Detective Mitchell immediately recognized its significance. Hayes was worried about something exposed to the elements, something that rain might affect. Combined with the hunting camp lead, it pointed to Emma being held somewhere outdoors or in a structure that wasn't weatherproof. "You're worried about the rain, aren't you, Robert?" Mitchell asked when the interrogation resumed. For the first time, Hayes's confident facade cracked slightly. His eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise before the cold mask slipped back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked the casual arrogance it had carried before. Agent Santos pressed the advantage. "You left her somewhere that isn't secure, didn't you? Somewhere the weather could get to. Her. That's why you're asking about rain forecasts. You didn't plan this as well as you thought you did." Hayes's hands began to shake slightly as he lit another cigarette, and both investigators knew they were finally getting to him. The psychological pressure intensified when Dr. Reeves suggested bringing Maria Rodriguez to the station. "Sometimes, seeing the mother's pain can break even the hardest criminals," she explained. "If Hayes has any humanity left, seeing what he's done to Emma's family might crack his defenses." It was a desperate gamble, but with time running out and Emma's life hanging in the balance, they were willing to try anything. When Maria entered the observation room adjacent to the interrogation chamber, her presence was felt immediately, even through the one-way glass. She carried with her Emma's favorite stuffed animal, a small purple elephant named Peanut that had been Emma's constant companion since her first birthday. Maria pressed her face to the glass and whispered, Please tell us where she is. She's just a baby. She needs her medicine for her asthma, and she gets scared in the dark." Hayes could hear Maria's voice through the intercom system, and for a moment, something human flickered across his face. But then he remembered his leverage, his power, and the cold mask returned. "Bring me a guarantee in writing that I won't face the death penalty," he said finally, "and maybe we can talk about making a deal. But until then, that little girl's fate is entirely in your hands." Tick-tock, detective. Tick-tock as the afternoon wore on and the temperature outside climbed toward a dangerous 102 degrees. Everyone involved in Emma's case knew they were running out of time. Somewhere out there, a 3-year-old girl was counting on them to save her life, and the only person who knew where she was sat smugly in an interrogation room, playing games with her existence, while precious minutes slipped away into an increasingly desperate evening. The standoff with Robert Hayes had stretched into its 7th hour when District Attorney Rebecca Martinez arrived at the police station with a document that could change everything. The official plea agreement guaranteed Hayes would avoid the death penalty in exchange for Emma's location, but it came with a chilling deadline. If Emma wasn't found alive within 12 hours of signing, the deal would be void, and Hayes would face capital murder charges. It was 7:30 p.m. on July 5th, and Emma had been missing for over 25 hours in temperatures that had peaked at 104 degrees. Hayes read the document with the careful attention of someone who understood he was negotiating for his life. His hands had stopped shaking, and the confident smirk had returned to his face as he realized he still held the ultimate card. "This is acceptable," he said finally, signing his name with a flourish that seemed to mock the gravity of the situation. "But I have one more condition. I want to ride along when you find her. I want to see your faces when you realize what I've done." Detective Mitchell wanted to refuse, but time was running out, and Hayes seemed determined to extract every ounce of psychological torture from the situation. "Fine," she agreed through gritted teeth. "But if you're lying, if this is some kind of game, I'll personally make sure you never see the outside of a prison cell again." Hayes laughed that same chilling laugh and leaned back in his chair. "Oh, Detective, this is no game. Emma Rodriguez is exactly where I left her 3 days ago." The location Hayes finally revealed sent ice through everyone's veins: an abandoned hunting cabin in the Chizos Mountains, nearly 6 hours from Brownsville, and accessible only by a treacherous dirt road that wound through some of the most isolated terrain in Texas. Hayes had driven Emma there immediately after taking her, intending to keep her prisoner indefinitely. But when she wouldn't stop crying for her mother, he'd made a decision that revealed the true depths of his cruelty. He'd simply left her there, locked in a storage closet, with minimal food and water. She was supposed to learn to be quiet. Hayes explained with the casual tone of someone discussing training a pet. But she kept screaming for Mama and Daddy, so I decided to teach her a lesson about being patient. I left her enough crackers and water for maybe 2 days. That was 3 days ago. The implications hit everyone in the room like physical blows. Emma had been alone, terrified, and potentially dying of dehydration while they'd been searching for her. The drive to the mountains became a race against time that felt like something out of a nightmare. Detective Mitchell drove the lead vehicle with Hayes in the back seat, his hands cuffed, but his mouth running constantly, with detailed descriptions of Emma's final hours before he abandoned her. She kept asking when she could. "Go home," he said with apparent amusement. I told her she was home now, and she needed to get used to it. Such a stubborn little thing. Behind them, a convoy of emergency vehicles followed. Paramedics with pediatric life support equipment, search and rescue teams with specialized gear for cabin access, and a medical helicopter that would fly Emma directly to Valley Regional Medical Center the moment she was found. Dr. Sarah Chun, a pediatric emergency specialist, had been briefed on Emma's likely condition and was preparing for the worst: severe dehydration, exposure, psychological trauma, and possible organ failure from 3 days without adequate food or water. Dirt road Hayes directed them to was barely wide enough for one vehicle, winding through dense brush and rocky terrain that seemed designed to hide secrets. Hayes provided directions with the precision of someone who traveled this route many times, confirming investigators' suspicions that he'd used this location before. "Turn left at the lightning-struck oak," he instructed. "Then follow the trail for another 2 miles until you see the cabin with the green roof." Mark and Jennifer Walsh were completing their 3rd day of hiking in the Chisos Mountains when they heard something that stopped them in their tracks. A sound so faint they initially thought it might be wind through the trees. But as they moved closer to an isolated cabin they'd noticed on their trail map, the sound became unmistakable: a child crying. The weak, intermittent sobs were barely audible, but both experienced hikers recognized the desperation in those small cries. "There's definitely someone in there," Jennifer whispered to her husband as they approached the dilapidated structure. The cabin looked like it had been abandoned for years, with broken windows, a sagging roof, and vegetation growing through the floorboards. But the crying was coming from inside, specifically from what appeared to be a storage closet on the far side of the main room. Mark tried the door and found it locked, but the old wood was rotted enough that a few solid kicks broke it open. What they found inside would haunt both hikers for the rest of their lives. Emma Rodriguez sat huddled in the corner of the tiny closet, her princess dress now dirty and torn, her face streaked with tears and grime. She was conscious, but barely responsive, her lips cracked from dehydration and her breathing shallow. Scattered around her were the remnants of stale crackers and an empty water bottle that had obviously been her only sustenance for days. "Mama?" Emma whispered when she saw Jennifer's face, her voice so weak it was barely audible. "I want my Mama." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears as she gently lifted the little girl, feeling how light she'd become and noticing the signs of severe dehydration: sunken eyes, dry mouth, and skin that felt almost paper thin. Mark was already on his satellite phone, calling for emergency medical assistance and providing GPS coordinates to the rescue teams. The medical helicopter reached the cabin 37 minutes after the Walsh's emergency call, just as Detective Mitchell's convoy was still 20 minutes out on the winding mountain road. Paramedic Lisa Rodriguez, no relation to Emma's family, later said that Emma was within hours of complete organ failure when they found her. Her body temperature was dangerously low despite the heat. Her blood pressure was barely detectable, and she showed signs of kidney stress that indicated another day alone might have been fatal. "Mama," Emma whispered again as the paramedics worked to stabilize her with 4 fluids and warming blankets. Her voice was getting stronger, and her eyes were beginning to focus on the faces around her. "I was scared. The bad man said I had to stay in the dark place." Lisa Rodriguez felt tears streaming down her own face as she reassured Emma that she was safe now, that her mama and daddy were waiting for her, and that the bad man could never hurt her again. When Detective Mitchell's vehicle finally reached the cabin, Hayes was strangely quiet as he saw the medical helicopter preparing to take off with Emma inside. For the first time since his arrest, his confident facade seemed to crack as the reality of what he'd done hit him. "I didn't think she'd last this long," he muttered, almost to himself. "Most of them don't make it past the second day." As the helicopter disappeared over the mountain ridges, carrying Emma toward safety and her desperate family, Detective Mitchell looked at Robert Hayes and felt a cold satisfaction. "You're right," she told him. "Most children wouldn't have survived what you did to Emma, but you picked the wrong little girl to try to break. She's stronger than you ever imagined, and she's going home to people who love her, something you'll never understand." The miracle in the mountains was complete, but Emma's journey back to the life Hayes had tried to steal from her was just beginning. 6 months after her rescue from the mountain cabin, Emma Rodriguez sat in the family therapy room at Children's Hospital, her small hands carefully coloring a picture of her house with bright crayons. To most observers, she looked like any other 4-year-old girl. Her physical health had returned completely. Her weight was normal, and the sparkle had returned to her dark eyes. But the psychological scars from her ordeal ran deeper than anyone could see. Emma hadn't spoken about her kidnapping since her rescue, and child psychologist Dr. Linda Chun was working carefully to help her process the trauma without re-traumatizing her. "She's made remarkable progress," Dr. Chun explained to Maria and Carlos Rodriguez during one of their weekly consultations. "Her selective mutism about the incident is actually a protective mechanism. Her mind is shielding her from memories too painful to process at her developmental level. The good news is that she's not showing signs of severe PTSD, and she's been sleeping through the night for the past month." Maria squeezed Carlos's hand, remembering those first weeks when Emma would wake up screaming from nightmares about the dark place. The trial of Robert Hayes had been scheduled to begin in February 2025, and the prosecution faced a seemingly impossible challenge. How do you convict a child predator when your key witness is too young and too traumatized? Testify? District Attorney Rebecca Martinez had built a strong circumstantial case, but defense attorney Michael Sterling was arguing that without Emma's direct testimony, the evidence was insufficient to prove Hayes's intent to harm rather than simply relocate the child. Judge Margaret Foster, a veteran of family court with 23 years on the bench, had seen many difficult cases involving children, but Emma's situation presented unique legal challenges. Texas law generally required witnesses to be able to understand the difference between truth and lies, take an oath, and answer questions coherently, standards that most 3-year-olds couldn't meet under normal circumstances, let alone after experiencing severe trauma. "Your Honor," Prosecutor James Mitchell argued during pre-trial hearings, while Emma Rodriguez cannot provide traditional testimony, the physical evidence speaks for itself. Hayes' own confession places him at the scene. His van contained evidence of the crime, and his deliberate abandonment of a child in a remote location demonstrates clear intent to cause harm or death. The prosecution had spent months building their case around forensic evidence, witness testimony, and Hayes' own admissions during interrogation. Defense attorney Sterling, however, had a different strategy. "Ladies and gentlemen of the potential," "Jury," he said during voir dire, "my client made poor decisions, but kidnapping charges require proof of intent to permanently deprive parents of their child. Mr. Hayes maintains he intended to return Emma to her family and simply made tragic errors in judgment while experiencing a mental health crisis." It was a desperate defense, but Sterling knew that creating reasonable doubt was his only path to avoiding a life sentence for his client. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source, Dr. Chun's therapy notes. During their sessions, Emma had begun drawing pictures that told the story of her ordeal in ways that words couldn't capture. One drawing showed a scary man putting her in a dark box. Another depicted herself calling for Mama while surrounded by black scribbles, representing the closet where Hayes had imprisoned her. Most compelling was a drawing of a good doggy finding her, with Rex the German Shepherd clearly recognizable, despite being rendered in a 4-year-old's artistic style. These drawings demonstrate that Emma has clear memories of her kidnapping and rescue, Dr. Chun testified during a competency hearing. While she cannot verbalize her experience in a courtroom setting, her artistic expression shows remarkable clarity about what happened to her. She understands the sequence of events, recognizes the people involved, and has specifically identified Officer Thompson's canine partner Rex as her rescuer. Judge Foster faced a legal dilemma that would set precedent for future cases involving very young victims. Could a child's artistic expression be considered a form of testimony? Could nonverbal communication carry the same weight as sworn statements? The judge spent 3 weeks reviewing case law, consulting with child development experts, and considering the implications of her decision. The ruling came on a cold February morning that would change courtroom procedure forever. While this court recognizes that traditional testimony standards exist for good reason, Judge Foster announced, "We also acknowledge that crimes against very young children require adaptive approaches to justice." Emma Rodriguez's drawings, created under therapeutic supervision and authenticated by qualified experts, will be admitted as evidence of her experience. Hayes sat at the defense table, looking confident as the trial began, his new haircut and pressed suit giving him an almost respectable appearance that disgusted everyone who knew what he'd done. He'd maintained his innocence throughout the proceedings, claiming that he'd only intended to teach Emma a lesson and had planned to return her safely. His calm demeanor suggested he believed his defense attorney's strategy might actually work. The prosecution methodically presented their case over 6 days, calling 43 witnesses including Officer Thompson and Rex, the hikers who found Emma, medical personnel who treated her, and forensic experts who analyzed evidence from Hayes's van. Each piece of testimony built a comprehensive picture of premeditated kidnapping and attempted murder. But everyone knew the trial's outcome might hinge on whether Emma could somehow communicate what had happened to her. The courtroom was packed. On the day, Judge Foster announced that a special demonstration would be conducted to help the jury understand how police canine units had contributed to Emma's rescue. Officer Thompson and Rex would show how search dogs track missing children, giving jurors insight into the professional expertise that had ultimately saved Emma's life. What nobody expected was that Emma Rodriguez would be in the courtroom that day. Maria and Carlos had brought Emma to observe the proceedings, hoping that seeing the courtroom environment might help her process her experience in a controlled setting. Dr. Chun accompanied them, ready to remove Emma immediately if she showed signs of distress. Emma sat quietly between her parents, occasionally coloring in a notebook, appearing uninterested in the legal proceedings happening around her. When Officer Thompson entered the courtroom with Rex at his side, everything changed. In an instant, Emma's head snapped up from her coloring book, her eyes widened with recognition, and for the first time in 6 months, she spoke clearly about her kidnapping experience. The words that came out of her mouth would alter the course of the trial and deliver the justice that everyone had been praying for. The packed courtroom held its collective breath as Emma pointed directly at the German shepherd who had found her scent trail and led rescuers to the mountain cabin where she'd nearly died. What she said next would become the most powerful testimony in the entire trial, delivered not through legal procedure or sworn statements, but through the innocent recognition of a child who understood exactly who had saved her life. The moment Rex entered the courtroom, every eye in the packed gallery followed the magnificent German shepherd as he walked beside Officer Thompson toward the witness stand. The dog moved with the confident grace of a seasoned professional, his brown eyes scanning the room with alert intelligence. Rex had no way of knowing that his demonstration today was merely window dressing for a much more important moment that was about to unfold, a moment that would deliver justice in the most unexpected and powerful way imaginable. Emma Rodriguez had been sitting quietly between her parents, her small hands moving colored pencils across a drawing pad while the adults around her discussed legal procedures she couldn't understand. Dr. Linda Chun sat directly behind the family, ready to intervene if Emma showed any signs of distress. For 6 months, Emma had been healing from her ordeal, but she'd never spoken directly about her kidnapping or her rescue. Today, that silence was about to break in spectacular fashion. Officer Thompson began his demonstration by explaining how police dogs are trained to track human scent over various terrains and weather conditions. Rex here has found 12 missing children during his 5-year career, Thompson told the jury, his hand resting proudly on his partner's head. When we received the call about Emma Rodriguez, Rex was able to track her scent from her backyard through an abandoned industrial complex and ultimately to the location where evidence of her abduction was discovered. As Thompson spoke, Rex remained in perfect position beside him, occasionally looking around the courtroom with professional curiosity. The German shepherd's presence commanded respect from everyone present. Here was a living symbol of law enforcement's dedication to protecting children, a 4-legged hero whose nose had quite literally saved Emma's life. But Rex had no way of knowing that the little girl he'd helped rescue was sitting just 30 feet away. Emma's reaction was instantaneous and electric. The moment she saw Rex, her entire body went rigid with recognition. The colored pencil fell from her small fingers as she stared at the German shepherd with an intensity that made her parents exchange worried glances. Dr. Chun leaned forward, ready to escort Emma from the courtroom if she became distressed. But what happened next surprised everyone. Instead of fear or anxiety, Emma's face lit up with the brightest smile anyone had seen from her since before her kidnapping. "Good doggy," Emma exclaimed, her clear voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "Like a bell." The words burst from her with such joy and recognition that several jurors gasped audibly. Judge Foster's gavel remained motionless in her hand as she watched the extraordinary scene unfold. Emma was pointing directly at Rex, her finger steady and sure, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Good doggy. He found me." The courtroom erupted in barely contained emotion. Maria Rodriguez began sobbing tears of relief and vindication, while Carlos reached over to squeeze his daughter's hand with trembling fingers. Here was their little girl, speaking clearly about her rescue. For the first time, and doing so with such innocent truth that no one could doubt the authenticity of her words. Defense attorney Sterling looked like he'd been punched in the stomach as he realized his entire strategy had just crumbled. Rex, hearing his praises being sung by a child's voice, turned toward Emma with professional interest. Dogs don't experience human emotions like pride or satisfaction, but Rex's tail began wagging as he recognized positive attention. Officer Thompson, understanding immediately what was happening, felt his own eyes filling with tears. This was the little girl they'd searched for, the child whose scent trail Rex had followed through that terrifying night 6 months ago. "He found me in the dark place," Emma continued, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke directly to the German shepherd. I was scared, but the good doggy knew where I was. He told the people to come get me. The simplicity of her words carried more impact than hours of expert testimony. Here was truth distilled to its purest form, a child's recognition of her rescuer, spoken without coaching or legal manipulation. Judge Foster had presided over thousands of cases, but she'd never witnessed anything quite like this moment. Emma's spontaneous testimony was more powerful than any sworn statement, more convincing than any expert witness, and more damning to the defense than any physical evidence. "The court will note," Judge Foster announced with barely controlled emotion, that Emma Rodriguez has identified Officer Thompson's K-9 partner Rex as instrumental in her rescue. Dr. Chun later testified that Emma's recognition of Rex demonstrated several crucial psychological factors. Her memories of the kidnapping were intact and accurate. She understood the sequence of events that led to her rescue, and most importantly, she was capable of distinguishing between those who had harmed her and those who had helped her. Emma's ability to identify Rex as her rescuer proves that she has clear, reliable memories of her experience, Dr. Chun told the jury. The prosecution seized on Emma's breakthrough immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," District Attorney Martinez said during closing arguments, "you have witnessed something extraordinary today. Emma Rodriguez, who has remained silent about her ordeal for 6 months, spoke clearly and without prompting when she saw the dog who saved her life. Her words were simple but profound. Good doggy. He found me. She remembers everything, including who took her and who brought her home." Hayes's confident demeanor finally cracked completely as he watched his victim identify her rescuer with such clarity and joy. For 6 months, he'd maintained that Emma was too young to understand what had happened to her, too traumatized to provide reliable information. But her spontaneous recognition of Rex destroyed that argument completely. She understood exactly what had happened, and her words proved it beyond any reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for exactly 93 minutes, barely enough time to elect a foreman and review the evidence. When they returned to the courtroom, their faces showed the same resolve that had carried the community through Emma's disappearance and rescue. "We find the defendant, Robert Hayes, guilty on all charges," the foreman announced. "Kidnapping in the first degree, aggravated child endangerment, and attempted murder." Judge Foster's sentencing, 2 weeks later, reflected both the severity of Hayes's crimes and the community's demand for justice. "Mr. Hayes, you targeted an innocent child, terrorized her family, and abandoned a 3-year-old girl to die alone in the wilderness," the judge stated. "The only reason you're not facing the death penalty is the plea agreement that led to Emma's rescue. You will serve life in prison without the possibility of parole, and may God have mercy on your soul." Rex received a special commendation from the governor of Texas, becoming the first police dog in state history to be honored for his role in solving a kidnapping case. But the real victory belonged to Emma Rodriguez, who had found her voice again, and used it to ensure that the man who tried to destroy her life would never hurt another child. 6 months later, Emma was thriving in pre-kindergarten, her trauma transformed into resilience through love, therapy, and the knowledge that she was surrounded by people who would never stop fighting for her. And sometimes, when Officer Thompson brought Rex to visit local schools for safety demonstrations, Emma would be there in the front row, calling out, "Good doggy," with the same joy and recognition that had delivered justice in a Brownsville courtroom.